Hi everyone, welcome back to A Caccia di Scienza. I'm talking English, I'm speaking English not because I'm having a stroke right now, but because I am with Dr. Gaia Vince. Thank you.
Who sadly doesn't speak Italian, apologies.
Oh, it's another problem, we'll see some dubs. So, we are on a schedule, so let's get straight to it. Dr. Gaia Vince, she wrote a wonderful book, it's called The Nomad Century. And I really suggest you to read this book because it's really, really important. It talks about climate change, migrations, how to face the upcoming changes we are going to endure. So let's start with the basics, Gaia. I can call you Gaia.
Please, please.
Okay, thank you. So, who are you? Why you wrote this book? And that's it. The four W's of an interview.
Well, so I'm a British former scientist, now writer and journalist, and I have been following human changes to our planet for several years, how people are changing the planet, changing the climate, biodiversity, all of that. And I realized that while we're talking a lot about the need to mitigate, the need to cut our carbon emissions as we transition to a clean economy, we're also talking about how we must adapt, put this adaptation to the new climate change. What nobody is talking about is that for many places on the planet, for many populations, there will be no way to adapt. The conditions are going to be too extreme. People are going to have to move. They're going to have to migrate, and we're expecting to see huge population displacement because of climate change. And I was so frustrated. No one is talking about this. No one is being honest, and there is no pragmatic plan for dealing with it. So Il secolo nomade is my attempt at starting a conversation, a much needed conversation about how we can manage this and make it work for everybody.
Okay, and this is a wonderful answer because it introduced my next question, which is, you have traveled long and far to write this book. You have wandered a lot.
Yes.
Because her nickname on Instagram is Wandering Gaia,
yes.
Nomen Omen, we say in English. Okay, so what I want to ask you is, lots of population, as you said, are going to face such extreme conditions that they will be forced to migrate. Now, these populations are mostly the ones that are also most responsible for climate change right now, for carbon emission, like India, China, of course, but not limited to them. But what I'm asking you is, in your travel.
So let me just stop you there in terms of who is responsible.
Okay.
So what we are seeing now, the climate change we're seeing now, and while I'm talking to you, Emilia-Romagna is underwater. It's devastating. €1 billion of losses, loss of life, really, really terrible. What we're seeing is because of historical emissions from the global north, from Europe, from Britain, from America, these countries that have created these carbon emissions. It is true that countries like China and India now are producing a lot of emissions. The consequences of those emissions are for the decades to come. Okay. We haven't seen them yet.
Okay.
What we're already experiencing, and in the global south are experiencing the heaviest impacts, are largely of emissions they did not create. They did nothing to create.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you. But the question is, did you experience the awareness in this population about the fact that they are going to be a nomad in the decades to come?
Well, many people have already started the migration. People are already very displaced. Migration is now inevitable because of climate change, and it is increasing. The exact numbers is not inevitable. It could be as many as 2, perhaps even higher, 2 billion people. It could be as few as hundreds of millions. It depends on us. It depends on our emissions reductions, and it depends on how much we adapt. But certainly, people in the global south have been experiencing things like Emilia-Romagna flooding for a decade now or more. They're constant, one terrible drought, terrible floods, terrible heat waves, coastal erosion storms, back to back, one after the other for many years now, and they know that it's climate change. They don't have the luxury of denying it.
Yeah, of course, but do they know that they will be forced to migrate?
Yes, they do know, because some of them,
it.
many have already migrated. I've been to many Andean villages in the Andes in South America where nobody lives there now. They've all moved because there's no agriculture, there's no livelihood, too much drought. In Bangladesh, same thing. Many people have moved. I've been to Maldives, to Kiribati, these small Indian Ocean islands where the government is already making plans to help people to migrate, whether it's to New Zealand or Australia or other countries in the region, because there is no hope now. So yes, they know.
Okay. Talking about migrations, one of the biggest issues I think for the Western world, I feel, is racism. Undeniably. So, right now, lots of parties, especially I see the Italian situation, most of the right-wing parties are treating immigration like a problem to solve, like a problem, not an opportunity, as you say in your book. And this comes when actually our immigration is not even so high in numbers. It's factual. It's not an idea.
Yeah.
It's facts. But how are we going to address racism when migration will be composed of millions of people? Right now we are talking about thousands of people coming in Italy. Already it's like, what this big issue.
Yeah, so I mean, there is an incredibly toxic narrative, very racist, against immigration. It's actually very recent. Before recent times, people wanted more. Borders were to keep people in and stop them leaving, and we were trying to encourage more and more people to come in, because for the economy we need farm workers, factory workers, we need more labour, and actually most countries still need more labour. So we've seen this surge, this rise in populist leaders, especially far-right leaders throughout the world, and the easiest narrative, this very toxic anti-migrant racist narrative, it's the easiest thing to do. If your policies are failing at home, you blame a marginalised group, whether it's immigrants, whether it's people with darker skin, whether it's people from a different faith, religious group, whatever, you blame them, and that takes the heat off you. So we know that. That's how it has always been. What has been terrible, in my opinion, is not really that. We expect that. Has been the failure of centrist and left-wing parties to challenge this, to counter this narrative with a much more progressive, truthful narrative about immigration, about the fact that actually we desperately need immigrants. We have a demographic crisis. We're not having enough babies to support an aging population. If you look in Italy, Sicilia is depopulated. The villages are empty.
Yeah.
There's no one living there. We have huge crisis in labour everywhere. Migration is not a security issue. It is an economic issue about labour movements, and of course a humanitarian issue. Now there are countries that are doing better. If you look at Canada, Canada plans to treble its population almost entirely through immigration over the coming decades. And that's the national plan. They put policies in place. They want to build a productive, purposeful, opportunistic Canada over the next century. That's a much more sensible way of working with the reality of human population numbers anyway rising. You know, we're at 8 billion people now. It's going to rise to 9, possibly 10, and places in the northern latitudes are going to be much safer. It's obvious people are going to move. We need to support that through a positive narrative and through planning to make sure that it's a success and isn't a crisis.
Now I'm gonna ask you something that is really controversial, and I want to point it out that this is just for the sake of the discussion, and I absolutely in no way believe in what I'm asking you. So, for some people, okay, let's start with this. We are overpopulated. We live in an overpopulated world.
Do we? I don't think that's true.
Let's say we are.
Okay.
We live in an overpopulated world.
In your opinion, yeah.
No, it's not my opinion.
Oh, okay.
It's not even my opinion. I say just
Okay.
I'm playing the climate denialist right now.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just playing. Okay. For some people, opposing to this migration could be a solution to the problem, because what? I don't care about you. What they're saying is just, I don't care about them. Are they living in a region that is now lethal to them? I don't care. They just die. We are gonna solve the overpopulation problem, and with it possibly the carbon emission will be cut out. I've heard this kind of
Right.
argument.
Well,
it's really awful.
So, well, first of all, we are a completely networked, connected, global society now. We can't afford in Europe for the economy of China to crash because of drought or heat waves affecting production and energy and all of that, and food. We can't afford for that because all of our economies are linked, all of our livelihoods are linked. So first of all, from the purely selfish aspect, that will lead to big misery everywhere. So that is one problem. Secondly, we can't stop this migration. This human movement is happening whether we like it or not. We can put more and more people into giant prisons. That doesn't help them, it doesn't help us, it's very expensive, and it doesn't work because too many people will come. And look ahead. I have primary school children. When they grow up, do I want them to be conscripted into an army to fight Bangladeshi people from Niger? Do I want that in a perpetual war? Or would I much rather that they were living in denser, productive cities with a Bangladeshi neighbour and a neighbour from Niger? Of course I would. That, for me, is a much safer and more sensible situation. We have many, many choices. It's not, in the book, I don't say this is exactly what we have to do or that is exactly what we have to do. These are the choices that we have. We can act really aggressively now on emissions, which we're not doing. That would be expensive. Everything has a trade-off. It would cost some livelihoods. They would need to be compensated. But the result is we would have much less of an economic shock and drama later on. Or we can go slowly on emissions as we are doing. But what's the plan then for all these people? What is the plan? Are we just going to have perpetual wars? Are we going to, what is that? So we have to have some sort of, that's not a plan. So what's your alternative? If you don't like the suggestions that I come up with, what then is your alternative? Because we do have choices. We could also talk about geoengineering. We could talk about much greater adaptation in, if we sent more money and we sent more skills to places that are already being unlivable because of climate change, fewer people will have to move. But we're not doing that either. So we have many choices. Let's be honest about them, be honest about the trade-offs, and decide democratically the path we want to go. Because, just refusing every option and closing our eyes to it, it will not go away. These people are coming.
What I think is that one of the reasons we are not addressing these problems is because we lack the capability to look ahead, especially the political parties. For example, one mandate usually lasts for 4 or 5 years, depending on the state, on the nation you are in. So, for most of the politicians, the mentality is why do something that will benefit someone who will come 30 years from now when my mandate will last only 4 years. Okay, so this brings me to another controversial question, because I like being so. Do you think that the climate crisis, whether it will be about the carbon emission or the migration policies, will we be able to address them, those problems, in a democratic way, or should we envision some more strict policies for once? For the sake of everyone?
No, I mean I'm a great believer in democracy. I don't think authoritarian regimes are doing any better.
Not authoritarian regimes.
Okay.
Not authoritarian regimes. Just for once saying, okay, we have to cut carbon emissions.
Yeah.
Now we are doing this. I don't care if you agree with this or not.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, actually, most people do agree. Most people want a greener economy. Actually, if you look at polling of Europeans, and certainly in the global south, everywhere, people actually prioritise the climate. They do want to see much more action on climate change than is being taken. But I agree that at the moment we are stuck in short-term policies. These are global problems. I think that we need some sort of UN body to help mandate this. But I would say there is an example of Costa Rica, which decided a few decades ago that they were the most nature depleted place, very deforested, in a terrible mess. They decided they were going to prioritize nature restoration, and they built it into the constitution. So it doesn't matter how many changes of government, it's very difficult to change the constitution. They were able to therefore create the first and only reforested nation that has actually built up, tropical nation that has actually reforested. More than a quarter of the country is protected, properly protected for nature. It's part of the national psyche. They are very proud of their national resource. They abolished the army and put it all into progressive social education, healthcare systems. They are this kind of emerald, this green jewel in the middle of this crazy Mesoamerican mess. And their economy, they're 100% of their power is renewables. Now they're also decarbonising transport and the rest of their industry. And a lot of their economy is now based on nature tourism. It's become that important. It works, and that's because they took a conscious decision to do that. It didn't just happen by accident. And we need leadership with vision. They had it. We sadly have not had that.
Okay. Last question. Do I have time? Okay.
Yeah.
So, what I read between the lines in this book is that you are fairly pessimistic about our ability to cut the carbon emission.
Yeah.
But I see you are pretty optimistic in the fact that we will be able to face the migration. Now, is my interpretation correct?
Well, I'm looking at the models and where we are at the moment and being pragmatic. So we hear a lot about keeping 1.5 alive and, we'll keep below 2 degrees. We're going to overshoot 1.5 within the next few years, certainly by the early 2030s. Also 2 degrees, almost certainly.
I read now it's been anticipated to 2027.
There you go. So we're going to exceed these temperatures quite soon. We need to wake up to this very different world, and we need to be pragmatic and plan for that. It will involve migration. I've set out a number of ways that we could make that work, in addition to lots of other things that we need to change: our food system, our energy system, housing. Everything will need to be adapted. This is a different world that we're moving into, and we're not seeing honesty about what that actually means for individual nations and for the world generally. We need that from leaders, and then we need to know what the choices are. Like, if we did this, what would that mean for the landscape, for the cities, for the economy, all of these things. We're not seeing that's spelt out by leaders, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say we do still have choices. This is the way I think makes the most sense, but you know, these should be choices that we vote on and we decide together. And for that, we need a vision of the world that we could have, because it's not so great now.
I agree. So, to conclude, one piece of advice you would give to the next man, to the everyday life.
Yeah, vote sensibly for somebody who is actually thinking about the most important crises that we face. Invest sensibly if you have a pension or other savings. Don't invest in a dying industry like fossil fuels. Invest in the progressive new economies. Reduce how much meat you eat, meat and dairy. We can all eat more plant-based food.
Okay, thank you. It's been wonderful talking with you. Thank you,
Big pleasure.
Dr. Gaia.
Big pleasure. Thanks.